Hello. In this video, we're going to go over how to set up a shared folder between your host machine and the virtual machine. So a shared folder is a way that we can share files between your host machine, in this case, or in my case, my main Windows laptop, and the virtual machine, which will be running in my Windows laptop. So to get a file onto my virtual system, there are several ways we can do this, but we'll go over how to do it with what's called a shared folder. So to do this, we're going to click on Settings and go into the Shared Folders tab. So if you're just setting up this virtual machine, there may be a shared folder already in here that is linked to a path not on your machine. So if there's a folder in here and you have not set it up, go ahead and remove that folder. In my case, I've set this up and I want to keep it, so I'm not going to remove it. But you should go ahead and remove it and then hit Add New Shared Folder. So in your folder path here, you want to select Other and then browse to the location on your host machine of the folder you want to share. So if you haven't thought about this yet or created one, you can go to, like for me, I've gone to my desktop and I have created a folder on my desktop called VM Shared. And I have a lot of information in that. So that's my main shared folder. But you can create a folder anywhere that you want to be your shared folder. Once you've done that, you can give it a folder name. And then we're going to not select read only, because read only will not allow us to add or modify files in the shared folder from our virtual machine. But we're going to select auto mount. So if you look at this folder here that I already have set up, I've called it VM Shared. I've linked it to my folder on my host machine's desktop, and auto mount is selected. So that should be your settings. After that's done, go ahead and start the virtual machine. So while this is starting up, there's another way that we can commonly share files between a virtual machine and your host machine. And it's actually quite an easy way, although in my setup, for whatever reason, it doesn't work for me. So it may or may not work for you. Most people it seems to work for. But this is, they call it drag and drop. So you can just drag files that you want from your host machine into your virtual machine. To set that up, you can go devices, and there we go. So there's a drag and drop setting here. Also, you can activate shared clipboard as bidirectional. So the shared clipboard means that if you, for instance, copy a set of text or some text on your host machine, that will be placed in the clipboard, and then you can paste it into your virtual machine, or vice versa. Drag and drop should allow you to drag and drop files from your host machine to your virtual machine. But as I've mentioned, this has never worked for me, although we can give it a shot. So if you have drag and drop selected as bidirectional, what we should be able to do if it works is, so my virtual machine's over here on the right, and my host machine is on the left here. So we should be able to, for instance, drag this file into my host machine. or my virtual machine from my host machine, my Windows machine here. But as you can see, mine says it's failed and it doesn't let me. So, you know, as I said, this is, I think, something specific to my virtual machine that it doesn't work. Most other people's that I know, it works fine. So more than likely, that's one way you can get files to and from your host machine to your virtual machine, or from your virtual machine back to your host machine. But in this case, we're going to go ahead and set up this shared folder as well. All right, so we've created that shared folder, and now we're going to get into this home, our file manager here. And in the Linux OS, we can see the location of that shared folder by going to the root directory here and then selecting media, and you'll have either one or multiple folders called SF share or SFVM shared. So as you remember, my folder was called VM shared, so this is the one I want, and here are all the files. Now, when you first do this, if you try to double click on this folder, you should see it, but it most likely will not let you in or say you have no access to it. And that's because the CCS user by default in the Linux machine is not what's called in Linux a super user, but similar to an administrator in Windows. So we need to provide the CCS user access to that folder. There are instructions online, and I'll show a good tutorial here, or website. So you can grab this website. I will post it also in the text along with this video, so you can link to it. But this is a good article on how to set up a shared folder within VirtualBox. But the command that we need is this one right here. So if we scroll down, you need sudo add user VirtualBox. So we can just copy this and open up our virtual machine here. And in Linux, if you're not familiar with Linux at all, you have kind of a file editor here, but we'll also be using what's called the Linux bash terminal, which allows you to move around the file system and issue certain commands. So we'll be getting more familiar with this in future videos, but for now, you can open that up by clicking this button here, or you can just use this terminal down below here. And you can right click and say paste, and you'll see, because we have that bidirectional clipboard selected, our text from that we copied in our main machine is pasted in our virtual machine. And we can hit enter, and it's going to ask you for the password for CCS. So as we talked about in a previous video, the username for this virtual machine is CCS, and the password is default, DEFAULT. And once we hit enter, so for me, it says the user CCS is already a member. That's because I've done this in the past. But for you guys, this should be new, and it should add that the CCS user as a member of the VBox shared folders. Once that's done, we need to log out and log back in of the virtual machine. So to do that, we're going to select this Kubuntu logo, say leave, and log out. So this will log out of the CCS account in the virtual machine. And once we log out, you get to kind of this like user screen. So we just select CCS and again type default in the password box, and it will log back in as the CCS user. And once you're logged back in, you will have access to that shared folder in the media directory. Wait 1 second. Okay, so I had access before, so on my side nothing will change, but if we go back into the file browser and go to root, media, and you click again on the shared folder that was previously blocked to you, you should now have access to it. So what this does is, you'll notice, for instance, I have a bunch of files in here. Without having to read all the files, you can take my word that this schoolbook.png file is not in there. So if I wanted to get access to this picture within my virtual machine, I can't, within my virtual machine, because it is a localized computer, essentially a virtual computer, I don't have direct access to my host machine, my Windows machine. So to get access to that file, I can cut it and put it in this VM shared folder, which is the shared folder I set up in my machine. So I've put it in there, so now we have schoolbook PNG. And if I open back up my virtual machine and refresh the files in here, or just go back and click, and there it is. Took a while to appear. And there's the file. So now in our virtual machine, we have this file has appeared, and I can take it and put it in any folder in my virtual machine or use it. So in this way, we can share files back and forth between our virtual machine and our host machine, even if drag and drop doesn't work, or some people, like myself, actually just like having a folder that I can use to constantly trade files back and forth. So I know the files in this folder are used in both my host machine and virtual machine. Okay, and lastly, on my desktop, I have a link to my shared folder, and this just is to save a little time, so I don't need to come into my file explorer every time and go, media and then shared folder. I've also created some other links to make it a little easier, but to create a link here, you just simply need to find the folder in your file explorer, go ahead and click it and drag it onto your main screen, and you can either put it as an icon widget or a folder widget. So in this case, I have mine as an icon widget, which is like this. You can use this button to expand the size of it. So an icon widget just looks like this, and it will link you to your specific folder. Whereas a folder widget looks like these over here. So I also have it set up as a folder widget over here. Oops, actually, this top one. And then if you want to get rid of it, you can just hit that X. So that just simple link saves some time. Okay, I think that concludes the setup of the shared folder. Thank you.